The apple was halfway to Zane Lawson's mouth when Eira Finch said, in that voice she used when discussing soil drainage or rootstock grafting, "In my mother's lands, when a woman offers a man an apple and he accepts it, they are considered engaged to be married." And by the time his mind had processed the words, his teeth had already broken through the crisp skin, and sweet flesh flooded his tongue. He froze mid-chew, eyes wide, looking at the orc woman who stood before him in the dappled shade of his struggling orchard. Eira's green skin had gone a shade darker, almost olive around her high cheekbones, and her small tusks pressed against her bottom lip as she watched him with an expression caught somewhere between mortification and barely suppressed glee. She was of a height with him, perhaps an inch shorter, with a build that spoke of long days working outdoors but remained undeniably feminine in the way her patched work shirt draped over her frame and her worn trousers sat on her hips. Her black hair, pulled back in a practical braid, had come slightly loose around her pointed ears. Zane swallowed the bite of apple slowly, very slowly. Around them, the orchard rustled in the late spring breeze. Rows of trees that should have been heavy with blossoms but instead bore only scattered, struggling blooms. Beyond the orchard, his modest farmhouse stood against a backdrop of frontier forest, the nearest neighbor a mile down the rutted road that led eventually to the border town of Millgrove. "Engaged," he repeated, the word tasting stranger than the apple. Eira's hands twisted in front of her. "Yes. It is an old custom, very binding. Among my people it is considered as serious as, well." She trailed off, and her eyes would not quite meet his. Zane looked at the apple in his hand, at the perfect half-moon of his bite mark, and then back at Eira. He had hired her 3 days ago when she had appeared at his door, pack on her back and letters of reference from 2 orchardists in the Southern Territories. She had arrived at the perfect time, really, just as he was staring at his blighted trees and the promissory note from Marcus Hendren, the merchant who held the mortgage on his land. One more failed harvest and Hendren would foreclose. Zane needed a miracle. What he had gotten was a skilled orc grafter with gentle hands and sharp eyes who could read a tree's health the way some people read books. What he had apparently also gotten was a fiancé. "And you are telling me this now," Zane said slowly, "after I have taken a bite, not before." The darker flush spread down Eira's neck. "I thought you might have heard of the custom. Many have. I have not." "Ah," Eira shifted her weight. "Well, now you have." A laugh built in Zane's chest, surprising him with its warmth. Here he had been, worrying about his failing orchard and his mounting debts, and the universe had decided to hand him an entirely different sort of complication. He looked at Eira, really looked at her. She had arrived dusty from the road, asking for work with a quiet dignity that had impressed him. In 3 days, she had assessed every tree in his orchard, prepared grafting supplies he could never have afforded on his own, and shared meals with him in comfortable near silence, speaking only when she had something worth saying. She had also, apparently, engineered their engagement. "So we are engaged now," Zane said, and watched Eira's eyes widen slightly. "By your customs. Technically. But you are human, so obviously the custom does not bind you. I only thought you should know, in case, if anyone from the orc settlement should visit and, well." Eira was talking faster now, words tumbling over each other. "It would be awkward if they offered congratulations and you looked confused, so now you know. You can explain it was a misunderstanding, or simply ignore it. The custom is not human after all, so you have no obligation. I accept," Zane said. Eira stopped talking. Her mouth remained slightly open. Zane took another deliberate bite of the apple, maintaining eye contact. The fruit really was exceptional, with a perfect balance of sweet and tart that his own trees had not produced in 2 years. If we are engaged, we are engaged. I will not dishonor the custom of your people by dismissing it as a misunderstanding. But you—" Eira seemed to have lost her capacity for complete sentences. "You cannot possibly—" "Cannot possibly what? Accept an engagement to a skilled grafter who may well save my orchard. That seems remarkably sensible, actually." Zane grinned at her, the same grin that had charmed his way out of trouble more times than he could count, though he found to his surprise that he meant every word. There was something delightful about the way Eira had orchestrated this, the bold audacity of it combined with her current flustered state. "Unless you are trying to take it back. Is there a reversal custom? Must you retrieve the apple from my stomach somehow?" "There is no reversal," Eira said faintly. Her hands had moved from twisting together to hanging uselessly at her sides. "Once accepted, it is final." "Excellent." Zane finished the apple down to the core, then considered the seeds visible in the white flesh. "Should I do anything else?" "Is there a traditional response? You are not taking this seriously." "I am taking it extremely seriously. You offered me an apple. I accepted it. By your customs, we are now engaged. I see no reason to complicate the matter with panic or protestations." He turned the apple core in his fingers. "Though I will admit, I have never been engaged before. I may need guidance on the proper protocols." Eira stared at him. In the 3 days she had been working his orchard, Zane had seen her calm, focused, occasionally touched with dry humor when one of his trees proved particularly stubborn. He had not seen her look remotely undone. It was, he discovered, a good look on her. The afternoon light caught in her dark eyes and softened the strong lines of her face. "You are teasing me," she said finally. "A little," Zane admitted, "but I am also entirely serious. If you went through the trouble of engineering an engagement, the least I can do is honor it." He paused, studying her. "Unless you would prefer I did not. I can play the ignorant human if you like, claim I had no idea, though I warn you I am a terrible liar." "No," Eira said quickly. Too quickly. She seemed to realize this and added more slowly, "No, I would not ask you to lie." "Then we are engaged." "We are engaged," Eira repeated as though testing the words. Then, to Zane's fascination, a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, making her tusks more prominent. "My mother will be insufferable about this." "Will she?" Zane gestured toward the farmhouse. "I put on water for tea earlier. It should still be hot. Perhaps you could tell me more about what I have gotten myself into." They walked together through the orchard rows, Eira's practiced eye still assessing trees even as they moved. "This one needs the graft higher," she murmured, touching a twisted branch. "The disease is spreading from the root. Will it survive if we work quickly?" She glanced at him. "You have good stock here. These trees simply need better fortune than they have had." "That makes 2 of us," Zane said lightly, though he felt the weight of Marcus Hendren's mortgage like a stone in his pocket. He had borrowed money to buy this orchard 3 years ago, full of optimism and plans. The first year had been good. The second had been adequate. This 3rd year, with its late frost and creeping blight, threatened to undo everything. The farmhouse was small but well-maintained, 2 rooms and a loft, with a solid stone hearth that Zane had repaired himself his first winter. Eira had been sleeping in the barn, insisting she preferred it, and Zane had not argued. Now, with the word engaged sitting between them like a third presence, he wondered if he should have. He poured tea into 2 mismatched cups while Eira settled at the rough wooden table. Through the window, the orchard stretched in uneven rows, a patchwork of his hopes. "In the Orc lands," Eira began, wrapping her hands around her cup, "the apple custom is old. Older than writing, my grandmother said. It comes from a time when the orchards were sacred places, and the trees were tended by women who carried grafting knives as warriors carry swords. She smiled at some private memory. My mother is one such woman. She can taste an apple and tell you what rootstock it came from, what soil it grew in, whether the tree that bore it will last another winter. She taught you, Zane said. Everything I know about trees, yes, about other matters. Eira's smile turned wry. She despairs of me. I have refused every match she attempted to arrange, much to her frustration. She said I was too particular, too focused on my work, that I would end up alone with only my grafting knives for company. Zane took a sip of tea, watching Eira over the rim. And yet here you are, engaged. Here I am, Eira agreed. The flush had faded from her skin, but she still would not quite meet his eyes. I should explain. I did not come here entirely by chance. No, I heard about your orchard in Millgrove, about the blight, the struggling harvest, the merchant holding your debt. She finally looked at him directly. I also heard about you. All terrible things, I am sure. I heard you were kind to an orc family passing through last winter, that you sold them supplies at fair prices when the Millgrove merchants would not serve them at all, that you helped repair their wagon wheel and would not accept payment. Eira's fingers tightened on her cup. Kindness to my people is rare enough that word spreads. Zane remembered the family, a father and mother with 3 children, heading north to join relatives in the settlements. They had been desperate and frightened, and he had done what any decent person would do. That was nothing. It was not nothing to them, or to me when I heard of it. Eira took a breath. I wanted to help you. Your orchard can be saved, I am certain of it. But I knew you could not afford a master grafter's wages. So I came offering to work for only room and board, with payment to come from a share of the harvest. Which I appreciated, but did not quite understand, Zane said slowly. Master grafters do not work for the promise of future payment. You could command good wages anywhere. I could, Eira agreed, but I did not want to work anywhere. I wanted to work here. She met his eyes. With you. The words hung in the air between them. Outside, a bird called from the orchard, a bright trill that seemed too cheerful for the weight of the moment. You fell first, Zane said softly, understanding blooming like the blossoms his trees should have borne. That is why the apple. You planned this. Yes. Eira's voice was barely above a whisper. I am not. I am not skilled at this sort of thing. I can graft a tree, I can read soil and weather, but I do not know how to speak of feelings. So I thought perhaps I could use a custom from my people, something clear and binding that would let me show rather than tell. But then you hired me and you were. She gestured helplessly. You were kind and funny, and you loved your trees even though they are failing you. And I thought perhaps I had made a terrible mistake, because what if you did not? Zane reached across the table and took her hand. Her skin was warm, slightly rough with calluses from her work. Eira. She stopped talking. I am glad you came here, Zane said. I am glad you offered me the apple. And I am very, very glad I took a bite before you could warn me. He smiled. Though I suspect I would have bitten anyway, even if you had told me first. You do not know me, Eira said, but her hand had turned in his, fingers intertwining. We have known each other 3 days. I know you wake before dawn and speak to the trees while you work. I know you take your tea without sugar but add honey when you think no one is watching. I know you have a gift for this work that goes beyond skill, into something like magic. Zane squeezed her hand gently. I know I would be a fool to turn away someone who looks at me the way you do when you think I am not paying attention. Eira's breath caught. How do I look at you? Like I am worth saving, Zane said quietly. The same way you look at my struggling trees. For a moment, Eira simply stared at him. Then she laughed, a sound of pure surprised joy. That is possibly the strangest declaration I have ever heard. I did warn you I am not a good liar. I have to rely on strange truths instead. He grinned at her. So, we are engaged. What happens now? Now, Eira said, her voice steadier, we save your orchard. The rest can follow. The rest began to follow almost immediately, though not in ways Zane had anticipated. Word of his new grafter spread quickly in the small frontier community, and word that the grafter was an orc woman spread even more quickly. The first morning after the apple incident, old Miriam from the neighboring farm appeared at the orchard gate with a basket of early vegetables and a wealth of questions thinly veiled as friendly concern. Just wanted to see how you were managing, Miriam said, her sharp eyes finding Eira immediately where she worked among the trees. That is quite an unusual worker you have taken on. Quite skilled, too, Zane said pleasantly, accepting the basket. She has already identified the source of the blight and begun treatment. I may have a harvest yet. And she is staying. Where exactly? The barn, for now. Zane kept his voice carefully neutral. The engagement was real by orc customs but unannounced by human ones, and he was not sure how to navigate that particular complication. Not yet. Miriam's expression suggested she had opinions about orcs in barns, but was polite enough not to voice them directly. Well, I hope she proves worth the risk. There are those in Millgrove who will not like you employing her kind. Then it is fortunate I live out here rather than in Millgrove, Zane said, still pleasant, but with an edge that made Miriam blink. When the older woman had left, Eira emerged from the trees. You will have trouble for hiring me. I have had trouble before. I will have it again. This particular trouble seems worthwhile. Zane sorted through the basket, finding potatoes, carrots, and early greens. Besides, old Miriam is more curious than hostile. She will spread word that I have an orc grafter, but she will also spread word that the orchard is improving. Which, I notice, it is. It was true. In the week since Eira had arrived, armed with her grafting knives and her deep knowledge, the orchard had begun to transform. Not dramatically, not overnight, but in small ways that accumulated into hope. She had shown Zane how to identify the blight spread, how to cut away diseased wood and seal the wounds. She had prepared grafts from healthy stock, splicing new life onto old roots. Most impressively, she had somehow sourced rootstock from her contacts in the south, hardy varieties resistant to the blight that plagued his trees. The grafts will not fruit this year, Eira warned as they worked together one morning, Zane following her instructions to hold a branch steady while she made her careful cuts. But they will establish themselves, and next year you will have strong growth. The year after, fruit. That does not solve my immediate problem, Zane said. Marcus Hendren will not wait 2 years for his money. Eira's hand stilled. When is your debt due? End of harvest season, 3 months. Zane watched her work, the precise movements of her grafting knife. If I cannot pay, he takes the orchard. Can you negotiate? Ask for more time. Hendren is not interested in time. He is interested in land. My orchard borders his own holdings. He would be perfectly happy to see me fail so he can buy the property for a fraction of its worth. The bitterness leaked into Zane's voice despite his efforts. I was a fool to borrow from him in the first place, but he was the only one willing to lend to someone with more ambition than coin. Eira finished the graft, wrapping it carefully with treated cloth. 3 months, she murmured. The early apples will be ready by then. If we can produce enough for a cider pressing, something of exceptional quality, it would have to be exceptional indeed to cover the debt. Then we will make it exceptional. Eira looked up at him, her dark eyes fierce. You hired me to save this orchard. That is what I intend to do. Zane corrected gently. What we intend to do. You keep saying I, but we are in this together now. Engaged, remember, a smile flickered across Eira's face. You are never going to let me forget that, are you? Not for a moment. They fell into a rhythm over the following days, working from first light until the sun hung low over the western trees. Eira taught, and Zane learned, his hands growing steadier with the grafting knife, his eye growing sharper at identifying disease and health. They spoke while they worked, conversations ranging from the technical to the personal. I grew up in the southern settlements, Eira told him one afternoon, as they treated a particularly stubborn tree at the orchard's edge. My mother's family has tended orchards for 7 generations. Some of my earliest memories are of being carried through the rows on my father's shoulders, reaching up to touch the blossoms. Your father was an orchardist too? No, a toolmaker. He crafted grafting knives, pruning shears, specialized tools for the orchards. He died when I was 12. Eira's voice remained steady, but Zane heard the old grief underneath. A fever that swept through the settlement. My mother never remarried. She said she had her trees and her daughter, and that was enough. I am sorry, Zane said quietly. It was a long time ago. Eira carefully painted sealant onto a cut branch. What about you? You do not speak like someone born to farming, Zane laughed. Probably because I was not. My father was a merchant in the eastern cities, comfortable and respectable. I was supposed to follow him into the business, learn trade routes and contract law. He shook his head at the memory of his younger self, restless and dreaming. Instead, I came west. I wanted space and soil and something that was entirely my own. And you found this orchard. I found this orchard, bought it with a loan I could not afford, and promptly discovered I knew nothing about growing apples. Zane grinned. The first year I nearly killed every tree through sheer ignorance. The second year I learned enough to let them survive. The third year, the blight came. The blight came, Zane agreed. Fate apparently has a sense of humor. Eira was quiet for a moment, studying the tree before them. You could have gone back, to the cities, to your family. I could have, Zane acknowledged, but this is home now. Failing at something you love seems preferable to succeeding at something you do not. That, Eira said softly, is possibly the most foolish and most admirable thing I have ever heard. I contain multitudes of foolishness and occasional admiration. Zane nudged her shoulder with his. Lucky for me, I found someone foolish enough to offer me an engagement apple. Lucky for both of us, Eira said, and this time when she smiled, there was no embarrassment in it, only warmth. The complications began, as complications often do, from an unexpected direction. Zane had prepared himself for potential trouble from the townspeople in Millgrove, for suspicion and prejudice about his orc employee. What he had not prepared for was Marcus Hendren appearing at his door one warm morning in early summer, dressed in fine clothes that seemed absurd on the rural frontier, and wearing an expression of calculated friendliness that set Zane's teeth on edge. Lawson, Hendren said genially, as though they were old friends rather than debtor and creditor. I heard you had taken on a new worker. Thought I would stop by to see how the orchard is progressing. It is progressing well, Zane said, not inviting the man inside. Through the window, he could see Eira working among the trees, too far away to hear their conversation but close enough that Hendren had surely seen her. An orc grafter, Hendren said, following Zane's gaze. That is quite progressive of you, some might even say risky, employing one of their kind. Some might say a great many foolish things. That has never concerned me much. Hendren's smile tightened at the edges. Of course. Still, I hope you are not investing too heavily in this venture. The debt comes due in 3 months, and I would hate for you to be left in a difficult position. I am aware of when the debt comes due. Are you? Hendren's eyes were cold despite his pleasant tone. because I have heard rumors that you are attempting some rather ambitious grafting projects, long-term investments that will not bear fruit for years. That does not sound like the strategy of a man who needs to pay a substantial sum in 3 months. Zane kept his expression carefully neutral. I am managing both short-term needs and long-term sustainability. That seems sound to me. Hendren glanced again at the orchard, at Eira's distant figure. Well, I am sure you know your business, though I will say, as someone with considerably more experience in these matters, that relying on an orc's promises might not be the wisest course. They are not known for their reliability. My experience with Eira has been entirely reliable, Zane said, allowing some steel into his voice. More reliable than many humans I have dealt with. Eira, Hendren repeated, his tone making the name sound somehow improper. You are on familiar terms, then. She works for me. Of course we are on familiar terms. Just as long as you remain clear-headed about your situation. This orchard is valuable land, Lawson. If you cannot make your payment, I would hate to see it change hands due to misplaced trust in the wrong sort of help. It took considerable effort for Zane to keep his voice level. Is there anything else, Hendren? I have work to attend to. Nothing else. Just a friendly visit to check on my investment. Hendren tipped his hat, the gesture mocking. I will see you in 3 months, with payment, I hope. When the merchant had gone, Zane stood for a long moment on his porch, fighting down anger. The message had been clear enough. Hendren did not believe the orchard could be saved. More than that, he did not want it to be saved. He wanted foreclosure, wanted the land. That was Hendren. Eira had approached silently, her work boots making no sound on the soft earth. That was Hendren. He did not look friendly. He is not. Zane turned to her, taking in the dirt on her hands and the leaves caught in her braid. He wants this orchard to fail. I knew that, but having him come here, imply that trusting you was a mistake. He cut himself off, breathing hard. Eira's expression had gone very still. What did he say about me? Nothing worth repeating. He is a small man trying to feel large by diminishing others. Zane reached out and plucked a leaf from her hair. He does not know you. He does not know that you have already improved these trees more in 2 weeks than I managed in 2 years. 2 weeks will not be enough, Eira said quietly. Zane, be honest with me. How large is your debt? He told her. Watched her face as she calculated, the quick intelligence in her eyes tallying numbers and seasons and the market price of apples and cider. That is significant, she said finally. That is impossible, Zane corrected. Or near enough. Unless I can produce a miracle harvest from trees that were half dead a month ago. Then we produce a miracle. Eira's jaw set in a way Zane was learning meant she had made a decision. The early apples will be ready in 6 weeks. They will not be abundant, but what we have will be of exceptional quality. If we press them for cider and market it correctly, no one will pay enough for cider to cover that debt. They will if it is the finest cider they have ever tasted. Eira grabbed his hand. Trust me, I have an idea. Her idea, as it turned out, involved a combination of traditional orc fermentation techniques, careful selection of only the finest fruit, and what Eira called botanical enhancements that sounded suspiciously like alchemy to Zane's ears. It is not alchemy, Eira insisted, as she showed him the mixture of herbs and bark she had prepared. It is simply understanding which flavors complement the apples, which plants encourage the best fermentation. My grandmother taught me this. In the orc settlements, our cider is known for its complexity. And you think humans will pay premium prices for orc cider techniques? I think they will pay premium prices for the best cider they have ever tasted, regardless of its origin. We simply will not mention where the techniques came from. Eira smiled slightly. Let them think it is your family recipe if they prefer. They worked in tandem as the weeks progressed, Eira dividing her attention between the ongoing grafting and preparation for the cider pressing. Zane found himself learning not just orchard management but fermentation, pressing techniques, and the subtle art of flavor balancing. Eira was a patient teacher when he was focused, and mercilessly teasing when he made mistakes. "You are supposed to taste the must, not drink it," she said, watching him spit out a mouthful of fermenting apple juice with a disgusted expression. "It is unfinished. Of course it tastes terrible. You could have warned me. Where is the fun in that?" But she was smiling, and Zane found he did not mind being the source of her amusement. The orchard itself continued its slow recovery. The grafts were taking, the blight was receding, and the early apple trees began to swell with fruit. Not as much fruit as a healthy orchard would bear, but enough. "Maybe enough. They are beautiful," Eira said one evening as they walked the rows together in the cooling air. She touched one of the ripening apples with careful reverence. "This variety is old. I have only seen it in the southern territories." "My predecessor planted them," Zane said. "Old man who sold me the orchard. He said they were his grandmother's favorite. He had good taste. This apple makes exceptional cider, crisp and complex." Eira's hand lingered on the fruit. "In 2 weeks they will be ready." 2 weeks felt simultaneously too long and too short. Zane found himself watching the trees obsessively, checking for any sign of returning blight, any threat to their precious crop. At night, he lay awake in his loft and calculated numbers that never quite added up to solvency. "You are worrying yourself sick," Eira told him, finding him one midnight sitting on his porch and staring at the moonlit orchard. "I can hear your thoughts from the barn." "How can you hear thoughts? You were muttering to yourself. Come." She held out her hand. "Walk with me." They walked the orchard in silence for a time, the night air cool and clean. The trees rustled around them, and somewhere an owl called. Eira's hand in his was warm and solid, an anchor against his spiraling anxiety. "I am afraid," Zane admitted finally. "Not of losing the orchard, though that terrifies me too. I am afraid of failing you. You came here to help, orchestrated an entire engagement, and in return I am dragging you into my debt and my problems." Eira stopped walking. In the moonlight, her green skin looked almost silver, and her eyes were very dark. "Zane, I came here knowing your situation. I offered you the apple knowing your debt. I did not fall for some fantasy of you with a successful orchard and a fat purse. I fell for the man who loved his failing trees and fed a hungry orc family and still smiled even when things looked bleak." She touched his face with her free hand, her calloused fingers gentle against his cheek. "You are not dragging me anywhere. We are walking this path together." "Together," Zane repeated. The word felt like a promise and a prayer. "Together," Eira confirmed and kissed him. It was a soft kiss, tentative and sweet, tasting of the mint she had been chewing earlier. Zane's hand came up to cradle the back of her head, fingers tangling in her braid, and for a moment the orchard, the debt, the whole impossible situation faded into irrelevance. There was only Eira, warm and solid and real in his arms. When they parted, both breathing slightly harder, Eira rested her forehead against his. "I should probably return to the barn." "Probably," Zane agreed, not moving. "People might talk if they knew I was wandering about with you in the moonlight. People will definitely talk." "Let them," Eira said fiercely, and kissed him again. The harvest began on a bright morning in late summer, the air already warm with the promise of heat to come. Zane and Eira worked side by side, selecting only the finest apples, handling each one with the care it deserved. Old Miriam appeared mid-morning with her grandson, a sturdy boy of 16, and offered his help with the picking. "No charity," Miriam said gruffly when Zane tried to protest. "The boy needs to learn honest work. And I will not pretend I am not curious to taste this miracle cider I have been hearing about." "You have been hearing about it." Word spreads. "There are those in Millgrove placing advance orders." Miriam's eyes were shrewd. "There are also those saying an orc cannot possibly produce anything worth drinking. I plan to prove them wrong." By evening, they had filled a dozen crates with carefully selected fruit. It was not a large harvest, not by the standards of a healthy orchard, but the apples themselves were flawless. Eira examined each one, rejecting any with the slightest blemish or flaw. "We are not aiming for volume," she explained to Miriam's grandson, whose name was Thomas. "We are aiming for perfection. Every apple that goes into our cider must be worthy of the price we need to charge." Thomas, who had been watching Eira with the fascination of a young man encountering his first orc, nodded seriously. "My grandmother says you are the best grafter in the territory. Your grandmother is kind. My grandmother is never kind. She is honest." Thomas grinned. "Which means you really are that good." The pressing began the next day. Eira had prepared everything in advance, the pressing equipment cleaned and treated, the fermentation vessels ready. She worked with intense focus, adding her special mixture of herbs and bark at precise moments, tasting and adjusting with a concentration that reminded Zane of an alchemist performing some arcane ritual. "This is the crucial stage," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "The initial fermentation must be perfect, or everything that follows will be flawed." Zane stayed close, fetching what she needed, learning the process by observation. The barn filled with the sweet, sharp smell of fermenting apples, and Eira moved through it like someone conducting a symphony. Everything timed and measured and deliberate. 3 days into fermentation, Marcus Hendren appeared again. "I heard you were attempting a cider pressing," he said, standing at the barn entrance like an unwelcome omen. "Ambitious, given the limited fruit your orchard produced." "We work with what we have," Zane said, positioning himself between Hendren and the fermentation vessels. He did not trust the merchant not to sabotage them. Of course. Hendren's eyes found Eira, who had stilled at her work. "I must say, I am surprised you are relying so heavily on orc methods. The human palate is quite different, you know." "The cider will speak for itself," Eira said quietly, not turning from her work. "I am sure it will. Though I wonder if the good people of Millgrove will be quite as enthusiastic about purchasing cider made by orc hands. There are sensitivities, you understand." Zane felt anger surge hot and immediate. "The only sensitivity I understand is yours about potentially being proven wrong. You want this orchard to fail, Hendren. You have wanted it from the beginning." "I want my money, Lawson. How you obtain it is your concern, not mine." Hendren smiled, cold and empty. "Though I will say that if you are counting on this little experiment to save you, you had better hope your faith in your orc is justified. The debt comes due in 2 months. I will not extend the deadline." When he left, Eira's hands were shaking. Zane went to her immediately, covering her trembling fingers with his own. "He is trying to rattle us," Zane said. "Do not let him." "He is right, though," Eira said, her voice tight. "If people refuse to buy because I am orc, then they are fools and we will find other buyers. Eira, look at me." He waited until her dark eyes met his. "We are going to succeed, not because the cider is orc-made or human-made, but because it is exceptional, because you are exceptional, and anyone who cannot see that does not deserve to taste what we have created." Eira managed a shaky smile. "You have a great deal of faith for someone who has been muttering numbers in his sleep." "I have faith in you," Zane said simply. "The numbers can sort themselves out." The cider fermented. Eira tasted it daily, making minute adjustments, her expression intent. Zane watched the calendar and tried not to calculate how many bottles they would need to sell and at what price to cover his debt. The numbers never worked, no matter how he arranged them. 6 weeks before the debt came due, Eira declared the first batch ready for bottling. "This is it," she said, pouring a small amount into a clean cup and handing it to Zane. "The full complexity will not develop for another few weeks, but you can taste the foundation." Zane sipped carefully. The cider was crisp and bright, with layers of flavor that unfolded on his tongue. Apple, certainly, but also hints of something floral, something earthy, a complexity that made him want to immediately take another sip to unravel the mystery. "Eira," he breathed. "This is incredible." "It will be better in a few weeks," she said, but he could see the relief in her eyes. "We bottle tomorrow. Half we will age further for premium sales. Half we will sell immediately to generate quick capital." They spent the next day bottling, the repetitive work meditative. Each bottle was carefully filled, carefully corked, carefully labeled with simple script that read only Lawson Orchard Cider and the year. No mention of technique or origin. Just the cider itself, speaking its own truth. Word of the bottling spread. Old Miriam appeared again, this time with actual coin, demanding to be the first customer. She bought 6 bottles, tried one immediately, and nodded with grim satisfaction. "This will do nicely," she said. "I will be back for more once my family has tasted it. They will want their own supply, I guarantee it." Other neighbors followed. Curiosity drew them first, but the cider itself made the sales. Zane watched as person after person tasted Eira's creation and immediately reached for their purse. The price he charged was high, higher than normal cider, but no one balked. Instead, they bought multiple bottles and asked when more would be available. "There is a merchant caravan coming through Millgrove next week," one farmer mentioned. "They supply to the eastern cities. If you could get them to taste this, they might place a large order." It was exactly the opportunity they needed. Zane took half a dozen bottles to Millgrove the next day, finding the caravan master at the local tavern. The man was gruff and unimpressed until Zane convinced him to taste the cider. 15 minutes later, Zane had a contract for 300 bottles at premium prices. "This is the finest cider I have had west of the mountains," the caravan master said, examining his glass with newfound respect. "If you can maintain this quality, I will make you a regular stop on my route." Zane rode home in a state of elated disbelief, the contract folded in his pocket like a talisman. 300 bottles. At the contracted price, it would almost cover his debt. Almost. They would still fall short, but not by much, not by an amount that seemed insurmountable. Eira was working in the orchard when he arrived, examining the grafts she had made months ago. They were flourishing, the new growth strong and healthy. Next year they would bear fruit. The year after, a full harvest. The orchard had a future now, even if they could salvage the present. "We have a problem," Zane called to her, unable to keep the grin off his face. Eira straightened, alarm flashing across her face. "What happened?" "We have to produce 300 bottles of cider in the next 5 weeks. Whatever will we do?" It took her a moment to understand. Then joy broke across her features like sunrise. "You found a buyer. A caravan master who thinks our cider is the finest west of the mountains. He wants 300 bottles and is willing to pay." Zane named the price, watching Eira's eyes go wide. "That is almost enough," she breathed. "Almost enough," Zane agreed, crossing to her and taking her hands. "We are going to make it, Eira. We are actually going to make it." They kissed there among the trees, relief and joy and something deeper making Zane feel almost lightheaded. When they parted, Eira was laughing, a sound of pure delight. We have to start the second pressing immediately, she said, already mentally calculating. The current batch will cover most of the order, but we need more, and we need to maintain the quality no matter how rushed we are. Then we maintain the quality, Zane said. Whatever it takes. They worked themselves to exhaustion over the following weeks, pressing and fermenting and bottling in a constant cycle. Zane hired Thomas and 2 of his friends to help with the picking and basic labor, freeing himself and Eira to focus on the critical stages of fermentation. The barn became their entire world, smelling of apples and herbs and the sharp promise of success. Marcus Hendren stopped by twice more, each visit shorter and more sour than the last. Word of the cider's quality had spread, and with it, the knowledge that Zane might actually make his payment. Hendren's expression grew more pinched each time he saw the stacks of filled bottles awaiting shipment. Surprising, was all he said on his last visit, the word dripping with displeasure. I will see you in 3 weeks, Lawson, with full payment. Full payment, Zane promised, and watched the merchant leave with no small satisfaction. The caravan arrived exactly on schedule. The master examined the bottles with a critical eye, opened one at random to taste, and nodded with satisfaction. Quality has not dropped. Excellent. My clients will be very pleased. He handed over a letter of credit drawn on an Eastern bank. This covers the contracted amount. I will return in spring for another order. Make sure you have sufficient supply. When the caravan had left, Zane stood in his barn with the letter of credit in his hand and did the calculations one final time. The caravan payment, plus the sales to local customers, plus his carefully hoarded savings from the previous years, added to. We are short, he said aloud, the number stark and unavoidable. Not by much, by less than 1/10 of the total debt, but short. Eira, who had been organizing the empty bottles for the next pressing, went very still. How much short? He told her, watched her face as she processed the number, seeing her own calculations working behind her eyes. I have some money, she said slowly. Savings from my work before I came here. It is not much, but no, Zane cut her off firmly. This is not your debt, Eira. We are engaged. Your debts are my debts. Not this one. You have already given everything to help me. I will not take your savings too. He forced himself to think, to push past the disappointment and find a solution. I can sell equipment. Tools, perhaps the pressing apparatus. I can replace it later, but for now, you cannot press cider without a press, Eira said flatly. And we have orders for spring. If we cannot fulfill them, your reputation will be destroyed. Better a destroyed reputation than a foreclosed orchard. They stared at each other across the barn, the moment stretching taut, so close. They had come so impossibly close. There might be another way, Eira said finally, her voice careful. I have contacts in the orc settlements, orchardists who might advance payment for future grafting services. If I were to travel there, explain the situation, that would take weeks. We have less than 3 weeks until the debt is due. Then I ride fast. Eira's jaw set stubbornly. Zane, I can do this. Let me help. You have helped. You have done everything and more. He crossed to her, taking her face in his hands. I will not send you riding into danger to clean up my mistakes. It was not a mistake to buy this orchard. It was not a mistake to hire me, and it will not be a mistake to accept help from my people. Eira covered his hands with her own. Please, let me try. In the end, he could not refuse her. Not when she looked at him with such fierce determination. Not when the alternative was losing everything they had worked for. He gave in, hating every moment of it, and watched Eira prepare for a journey to the nearest orc settlement, 3 days' hard ride to the south. I will be back within 2 weeks, she promised, securing supplies to her horse's saddle, with enough to cover the debt and more besides. Be safe, Zane said, the words inadequate for the fear coiled in his chest. Please, Eira, be safe. She kissed him, hard and fierce. I will return to you. That is a promise. He watched her ride south until she disappeared into the trees, then returned to his orchard and tried not to count the hours of her absence. The first week dragged by in agony. Zane threw himself into work, tending the trees, preparing for future pressings, anything to keep his mind occupied. The grafts Eira had made flourished, silent testament to her skill. The orchard looked healthier than it had in years, full of promise and potential that felt like ash if they lost it now. Old Miriam visited midweek, bringing food and company. Stop moping, she said bluntly. Your orc girl knows what she is about. She will return. You are very confident. I am very observant. That girl loves you and loves this orchard. She is not going to let either come to harm if she can prevent it. Miriam fixed him with a sharp look. The question is whether you have the sense to make it official once she returns. Official. An engagement by orc customs is all well and good, but you are human, boy. If you want people to respect your union, you will need to marry her proper by human rights as well. Have you thought about that? Zane had thought about it. Late at night, he had thought about it extensively. About what it would mean to marry Eira, to bind their lives together not just by orc tradition but by human law. About the complications it would bring, the prejudice they would face, the difficult path ahead. He had thought about it and decided he did not care about any of it as long as Eira was willing. I will ask her, he told Miriam, when she returns, if she returns. When, Miriam corrected firmly, have some faith. Faith was easier to have when Eira returned on the 10th day, riding into the yard at sunset with exhaustion written in every line of her body. Zane ran to meet her, helping her down from her horse and supporting her when her legs nearly buckled. I have it, were the first words out of her mouth. Zane, I have the money. She produced a letter similar to the one the caravan master had given, this one drawn on an orc merchant house in the southern settlements. The amount was exactly what they needed to cover the shortfall, down to the last coin. How? Zane asked, disbelief and relief warring in his chest. I traded future grafting services, 3 seasons' worth, spread across 5 different orchards. Eira swayed slightly and Zane tightened his hold. They were happy to advance payment. Apparently my reputation is better than I thought. 3 seasons, Zane repeated. Eira, that is years of work. 2 months out of each year, and I can do most of it during the dormant season when your orchard needs less intensive care. She managed a tired smile. We can manage together. There was that word again, that promise and prayer. Zane kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. You incredible, wonderful, ridiculous woman, you did not have to do this. Yes, Eira said simply. I did. This is our orchard, Zane, ours. I was not going to let it go without a fight. They had the money. All of it, exactly what was needed, counted and verified twice over. Zane arranged a meeting with Marcus Hendren for the following day at the Millgrove Bank where such transactions were witnessed and recorded. Hendren's face when Zane produced the full payment was a thing of cold fury barely contained. This is the complete amount, counted and verified, the bank clerk confirmed. The debt is satisfied in full. I see. Hendren's hands clenched on the table. Very well, then. The lien is released. The orchard remains yours, Lawson. He made it sound like a threat rather than a statement. It does, Zane agreed, keeping his voice level and pleasant. And it will continue to remain mine. Thank you for your faith in extending the original loan, Hendren. I trust we will have no further business together. It was dismissal, clear and final. Hendren understood it as such, his face darkening, but there was nothing he could do, no legal ground on which to stand. The debt was paid. The orchard was saved. Zane walked out of that bank with Eira at his side, the deed to his land free and clear in his pocket, and felt something in his chest finally unclench. They had done it. Against all probability, against blight and debt and a merchant who wanted them to fail, they had saved the orchard. "So," Eira said as they rode back toward the farm. "What now?" "Now," Zane said, "we see about making our engagement official by human standards as well." Eira's head whipped around to stare at him. "You want to marry me, truly marry me, not just by my customs." "I absolutely want to marry you." "By your customs and mine and anyone else's who cares to have an opinion." He reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "Unless you have changed your mind about wanting to be engaged to me." "No," Eira said quickly. Too quickly, and then she laughed at herself. "No, I have not changed my mind. But Zane, are you certain? A human-orc marriage is not a simple thing. There will be people who will say things that do not matter," Zane interrupted. "Eira, you orchestrated an engagement by offering me an apple. You worked yourself to exhaustion to save my orchard. You rode 3 days to the orc settlements and traded years of your labor to secure money I needed. I think the question is not whether I am certain, but whether you might possibly want someone less complicated and troublesome than me." "I fell first," Eira reminded him, her eyes very bright. "I chose you knowing exactly how complicated and troublesome you were. I do not want less of either." "Then we are agreed. We will marry properly, by human rights, and tell anyone who objects that they can take it up with my fierce orc wife and her grafting knives." They married 3 weeks later, in a simple ceremony at old Miriam's farm with the neighbors as witnesses. Miriam herself stood up for them, glaring at anyone who looked like they might offer objections. There were a few, mostly older folks from Millgrove who muttered about impropriety and unnatural unions, but they were shouted down by those who had tasted the cider and seen the revived orchard, and decided that whatever else might be said about the match, it had certainly proved productive. Eira wore a simple green dress that matched her skin and made her eyes look like polished wood. Zane wore his best shirt, cleaned and mended by Miriam's insistent hands. The ceremony itself was brief, the vows simple, but when Zane slipped the ring onto Eira's finger and kissed her as his wife, the moment felt weightier than any grand celebration could have achieved. "You are mine now," Eira murmured against his lips, "by your customs and mine." "I have been yours since the apple," Zane replied. "This just makes it official." The wedding feast was modest but joyful, everyone contributing what they could. Old Miriam provided a roasted pig. Various neighbors brought bread, vegetables, early autumn fruits. And Zane, with Eira's blessing, opened bottles of their precious cider for everyone to share. "To the bride and groom," Miriam toasted, raising her glass. "May their orchard flourish and their union prove as fruitful." "To the bride and groom," the gathered neighbors echoed and drank deep. Later, when the celebration had wound down and the guests had departed, Zane and Eira walked through their orchard in the cooling evening air. The trees rustled around them, healthy and strong, grafts thriving. In spring, there would be blossoms. The year after, a full harvest. They had time now and space to breathe. "I have something for you," Zane said, reaching into his pocket. He produced a small cloth packet carefully wrapped. A wedding gift. Eira opened it carefully, then went very still. Inside were seeds, carefully preserved and labeled in Zane's handwriting. Apple seeds. From the apple she understood immediately. From the engagement apple all those months ago. "I saved them," Zane said. "I thought perhaps we could plant them, together, a tree from the apple that started all of this." Eira's eyes were suspiciously bright. "We cannot know what sort of apple they will produce," seeds do not grow true to the parent tree. Then it will be a surprise, a new variety unique to us. He took her hand. We can plant it by the house, watch it grow. By the time it fruits, we will have years of marriage behind us to remember while we taste it. Years of marriage, Eira repeated softly. That sounds wonderful. They planted the seed the next morning, in a carefully prepared spot where the morning sun would reach it, but the afternoon heat would not be too intense. Eira spoke softly in her native tongue as they covered it with soil, words Zane did not understand but whose meaning felt clear. A blessing. A hope, a beginning. How long until it germinates? Zane asked. If we are lucky, we will see a sprout by spring. It will be years before it is large enough to fruit, perhaps 5, perhaps 7. Eira brushed dirt from her hands. We will be old and gray by the time we taste the first apple from this tree. Not so old, Zane protested. We are young yet. Young enough to make many mistakes while we wait, Eira agreed, smiling. I am looking forward to it. The seasons turned. Autumn arrived in full, painting the orchard in shades of gold and crimson. Zane and Eira pressed another batch of cider, this one to be aged through the winter for spring sales. The caravan master had already sent word that his eastern clients were clamoring for more, willing to pay even higher prices for the exceptional cider. We could expand, Zane mused one evening as they reviewed their finances. Plant more trees, increase production. We could, Eira agreed. But let us not overreach. Steady growth, sustainable practices. That is how you build something that lasts. Steady growth, Zane echoed, pulling her close. I can manage that. Winter came, blanketing the orchard in snow and giving them time to rest after the frantic pace of harvest and pressing. Eira spent her days in the barn workshop, crafting grafting knives and preparing supplies for spring. Zane split his time between maintenance work on the house and learning everything Eira was willing to teach about advanced orchard management. You are a much better student than I expected, Eira told him one afternoon, watching him successfully execute a difficult graft on a dormant branch. I have exceptional motivation, Zane replied, and an exceptional teacher. They were happy in a way that felt almost startling after the stress of the previous months. Simple domesticity, shared work, evenings by the fire discussing plans for the spring. It was everything Zane had imagined when he first bought the orchard, and everything he had thought lost when the blight came. Old Miriam visited regularly, bringing gossip from Millgrove and supplies they could not produce themselves. Marcus Hendren left town, she reported one snowy afternoon. Sold his holdings and moved east. Rumor is he was deeply in debt himself and could not afford to maintain appearances any longer. I cannot say I will miss him, Zane said. No one will. He was a grasping man who made enemies of everyone he touched. Miriam accepted a cup of tea from Eira. His orchard went to the bank. They are looking for a manager if you know anyone qualified. Zane and Eira exchanged glances. We might, Zane said slowly, though we would need to discuss terms. They ended up acquiring Hendren's orchard for a fraction of its worth, the bank eager to unload the property to someone who actually knew how to run it. It doubled their land overnight and gave them space to implement Eira's long-term cultivation plans. They hired Thomas full-time to help manage the increased workload, and the young man proved eager and capable. Spring arrived with a flourish of blossoms that took Zane's breath away. The orchard, both the original and the newly acquired sections, exploded in white and pink blooms that hummed with bees. Eira walked among the trees like a general surveying her troops, satisfaction clear on her face. This will be a good year, she declared. A very good year. She was right. The harvest that autumn was abundant, the fruit of exceptional quality. They pressed cider until their arms ached, bottled until they ran out of bottles, and sold out their entire stock before winter arrived. The caravan master brought colleagues, other merchants who wanted contracts. By the time the snow fell, they had agreements that would sustain them for years to come. "We are actually successful," Zane said one evening, reviewing their accounts with something like awe. "Not just surviving, succeeding. Did you doubt we would be?" Eira asked, though her smile said she knew the answer. "Every single day until approximately this moment," Zane admitted, "and probably still tomorrow when I wake up. Then I will have to convince you otherwise." Eira moved to sit in his lap, arms around his neck, repeatedly if necessary. "I think repeated convincing will definitely be necessary," Zane agreed, and kissed her. The sapling from the engagement apple germinated that spring, a tiny green shoot that made Eira laugh with delight when she discovered it. They checked on it obsessively, marking its growth, protecting it from harsh weather and hungry deer. By the end of its first summer it was a foot tall, slender and promising. "5 more years," Eira said, touching the young tree with gentle fingers. "Then we will know what we have created." But they did not have to wait 5 years to know what they had created. It was evident in the thriving orchards, the bottles of cider bearing their label, the respect they had earned from neighbors and merchants alike. It was evident in the way they moved through their shared space, anticipating each other's needs, working in harmony toward common goals. It was evident in the way Eira laughed at Zane's terrible jokes, and the way Zane listened with rapt attention when she explained complex grafting techniques. 2 years after their marriage, Eira announced she was pregnant. Zane, who had been in the middle of repairing a fence post, dropped his hammer directly on his foot and hopped around the yard swearing while Eira laughed so hard she had to sit down. "You are going to be a father and your first response is to injure yourself," she managed between giggles. "This does not bode well." "Give me a moment to process," Zane said, abandoning the hammer to limp over and take her hands. "A baby. We are having a baby." "We are," Eira confirmed, her eyes soft. "In about 6 months if my calculations are correct." 6 months, Zane repeated. Then the reality hit him and he laughed, wild and joyful. "We need to prepare. A cradle. Baby things." "I have no idea what babies need, but surely we need something. We have 6 months," Eira said, pulling him down to sit beside her. "We have time." They had time and they used it well. Miriam provided a wealth of advice, some helpful and some terrifying. Thomas's mother contributed baby clothes her youngest had outgrown. The orc settlements, when Eira sent word, responded with gifts and blessings, and an invitation to visit once the baby was old enough to travel. The baby arrived on a cool autumn morning, just as the harvest was beginning. Zane, who had imagined himself calm and prepared, instead panicked thoroughly and had to be banished from the room by the midwife Miriam had insisted on hiring. "You are making her nervous," Miriam informed him, shoving him toward the door. "Go pick apples or press cider or something useful." He paced the orchard instead, counting trees and trying not to imagine all the things that could go wrong. Thomas found him 3 hours later, still pacing, and dragged him bodily back to the house. "You have a daughter," the young man said, grinning, "and your wife is asking for you." Zane took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into the bedroom to find Eira propped up against pillows, exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle. The baby was perfect, with Eira's green skin a few shades lighter and tiny, barely visible tusks. Her eyes, when she opened them to peer at Zane, were the same warm brown as his own. "Meet Zara," Eira said softly. "Our daughter." Zane sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out to touch the baby's impossibly small hand. Zara's fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength, and something in his chest cracked open with love so fierce it almost hurt. "Hello, Zara," he whispered. "Welcome to the orchard." Parenthood proved both easier and harder than Zane had anticipated. Zara was a good baby, healthy and happy, but she still required constant attention that made orchard work challenging. They adapted, taking turns, developing systems. Eira would nurse Zara in the barn while overseeing Thomas's grafting work. Zane would strap the baby to his chest and walk the orchard rows, pointing out trees and explaining their care to his tiny, uncomprehending audience. "She is going to grow up thinking apple cultivation is the most natural thing in the world," Eira observed, watching Zane show Zara a particularly fine specimen of fruit. "Good," Zane said. "This orchard will be hers someday. She should love it as we do." The seasons continued their turn. Zara grew from infant to toddler, learning to walk among the orchard rows, her first words a garbled attempt at apple that made both her parents ridiculously proud. The engagement apple sapling grew too, now taller than Zara, developing the sturdy trunk that promised future strength. On Zara's third birthday, the family gathered around the young tree for a small celebration. Zane had baked a cake, only slightly lopsided. Eira had woven a crown of apple blossoms for Zara's dark hair. Thomas had whittled a small wooden apple as a gift. 3 years, Zane said, looking at his daughter and the tree planted from the engagement apple's seeds. "Both of you growing strong and healthy." "The tree will fruit soon," Eira said, studying it with her practiced eye. "Perhaps next year, certainly the year after. We will finally know what variety it produces." But they already knew, Zane thought, the most important things. They knew that something beautiful could grow from a bold gamble and a bitten apple. They knew that love could take root in unlikely soil and flourish, despite blight and debt and prejudice. They knew that the orchard, their daughter, their life together was exactly what they had planted all those years ago when Eira had offered an apple, and Zane had accepted without knowing what it meant. 2 years later, just as Zara turned 5 and started begging to learn grafting techniques, the engagement apple tree bloomed for the first time. The blossoms were beautiful, tinged with pink, and when they gave way to developing fruit, Eira checked them daily with barely contained excitement. The apples that grew were unlike any variety either of them had seen before. Medium-sized, with skin that showed streaks of red and gold over green, they ripened in late summer and gave off a fragrance that was somehow familiar and entirely new at the same time. On the day Eira declared them ready, the whole family gathered around the tree. Thomas had been invited, as had old Miriam, who was now truly old but still sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued. "Well," Miriam demanded, "are you going to pick one or just stare at it all day?" Zane reached up and carefully twisted an apple free from its branch. It sat in his palm, perfect and promising. He looked at Eira, at their daughter standing between them, at the orchard stretching in healthy rows around them, at the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. "Together?" he asked Eira, offering her the apple. She took it, her hand covering his on the fruit. "Together," she agreed. They bit into the apple at the same moment, juice sweet and tart flooding their mouths. The flavor was complex, layered, with notes of the original engagement apple but also something new, something that belonged only to this tree, this moment, this family. "It is perfect," Eira said softly. "It is ours," Zane corrected, pulling her close with one arm while Zara demanded to try a bite. "Like everything else here." That evening, after Zara had been put to bed and the guests had departed, Zane and Eira sat on their porch and watched the sun set over the orchards. The engagement apple tree stood silhouetted against the orange sky, its branches heavy with fruit, a living reminder of where they had begun. "You ever think about how different things might have been?" Eira asked. "If I had not come here, if you had not hired me, if you had refused the apple?" "Never," Zane said immediately. Then, more honestly, "Sometimes. But only to be grateful that none of those things happened. This, right here, this life, is exactly what I wanted without knowing I could want it. A struggling orchard and a wife who tricked you into an engagement. A thriving orchard and a wife who loved me enough to take a risk on an apple custom." He kissed her temple. "Best trick anyone has ever played on me." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge. Somewhere in the orchard, an owl called. In the house behind them, their daughter slept peacefully. The cider barrels in the barn held their latest pressing, aging toward perfection. The land spread around them, theirs free and clear, full of promise and fruit and future. No regrets. Eira asked finally, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Not a single one," Zane said. "You? Only that I did not offer you that apple sooner." Eira smiled, her tusks catching the fading light. "Think of all the time we wasted before we met." "Then we will have to make up for it," Zane said. "We have years ahead of us. Decades if we are fortunate. That should be time enough." It was time enough and more besides. The orchards flourished. Zara grew into a skilled grafter who combined her mother's knowledge with her father's charm, eventually taking over management of the enterprise and expanding it further. More children followed over the years, each one welcomed and loved, each one learning to read the health of a tree and the promise of a blossom. The engagement apple tree became the heart of the orchard, the place where important family moments happened. Marriages proposed beneath its branches. Children taking their first steps between its roots. Each autumn, its unique fruit was harvested and saved, never sold, always shared among family and close friends as a reminder of where everything began. Years later, when Zane and Eira were old and gray as Eira had predicted, they would still walk the orchard together in the evenings. Their children and grandchildren would run the business by then, managing the cider pressings and merchant contracts, but Zane and Eira would still check the grafts, still assess the health of the trees, still find new ways to improve and innovate. "We did well," Eira would say sometimes, surveying their life's work with satisfaction. "The orchard thrives, our family thrives, all because of an apple." "All because you were brave enough to offer it," Zane would correct, taking her hand. "And foolish enough to wait until after I had bitten to explain what it meant." "Would you really have bitten if I had told you first?" "Absolutely," Zane would say, and mean it with his whole heart. "I would have bitten twice as hard to make sure you could not take it back." And Eira would laugh, the sound carrying across the orchard rows, as familiar and beloved as the rustle of leaves and the promise of harvest. Because that was the truth they had planted with that first apple seed and tended through years of work and love. Some things, the best things, the things worth keeping, grew from brave gambles and bitten fruit and the willingness to say yes to something that seemed impossible. Their orchard was proof of that. Their family was proof of that. And the engagement apple tree, still producing its unique fruit year after year, was the living reminder that sometimes the sweetest things in life came from seeds you never expected to plant, tended by hands that were meant to work together, growing into something more beautiful than anyone could have imagined.